Ronan Hale didn't see the coffee cup tipping until it was too late, but his 6-year-old daughter, Ella, sure did. "Dad," she squeaked, tugging his sleeve as the paper cup rolled off the edge of the table and splashed directly onto the black heels of the woman in front of them. "Oh, no, no, no," Ronan jumped to his feet, grabbing a pile of napkins and rushing to the woman's feet. "I am so sorry. She didn't mean to, she." The woman blinked down, confused, looking between the puddle of caramel latte soaking into the floor and Ronan crouched in front of her. "That was your drink." Ronan paused. She was right. His cup, his clumsy elbow. He looked up to apologize properly and froze. The woman was stunning. Not just pretty, but movie scene gorgeous, with sleek dark hair, bold red lips, and a tailored white coat that screamed money. But it wasn't the looks or the heels or the designer bag, he didn't know brands, but he could tell it wasn't from Target that made him feel like an idiot. It was the way she looked directly at him, not with judgment or annoyance, but curiosity. Like he was a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out yet. "I'm serious," he said, still crouched and dabbing at the floor. "I'm really sorry. Let me pay for your dry cleaning." She crouched down with a napkin of her own, brushing his hand gently aside. "It's fine, really. You're doing more damage to your pride than my shoes." He laughed under his breath, glancing at Ella, who had climbed back into her seat, wide-eyed and silent. "That's probably true. I'm Rowan," the woman said, holding out her hand. "Ronan," he said, shaking it. "And that's Ella." Ella gave a shy little wave, then ducked her head. Rowan smiled softly. "Hi, Ella." The barista called Rowan's name, then Rowan. "You're to go, orders ready." And she stood, brushing off her knees. "Thanks for the cleanup, Ronan," he nodded, still embarrassed. "Anytime you need a guy to ruin your shoes, I'm available." She laughed, full and warm, and then she was gone, heels clicking across the tile. He sat back down, heart still racing. Ella leaned in, whispering, "She was really pretty." "Yeah," Ronan said, staring after her. "She really was." Rowan Monro had no idea why a man cleaning her shoes had stayed on her mind all day. She had meetings, deadlines, 2 investment calls, and a lunch with a luxury real estate agent about the penthouse she was too busy to even live in. But somewhere in the back of her mind, that image lingered: Ronan Hale, crouched on a cafe floor, apologizing like he'd spilled champagne on a wedding dress instead of coffee on a pair of heels. He was different, not in the way most men in her world were different. They were either too polished or too rehearsed. Ronan looked like he hadn't shaved in 2 days and wore the same flannel twice this week, but his eyes, they were warm, kind, and the way he looked at his daughter like she was the entire world, it did something to her chest. She didn't know why she turned her driver around that evening, or why she walked back into that same little cafe at 6 o'clock, even though she never had time for second visits. But she did, and she found him there behind the counter. He was wiping tables, apron smudged with flour, his daughter sitting off to the side with a coloring book and a pack of crackers. He didn't see her at first, but when he looked up, his eyes widened. "Hey," she said, stepping forward. He blinked. "You came back. Had to make sure you weren't still down there scrubbing the floor," he laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not tonight. I clean tables now. Promotion. Living the dream." She smiled, then glanced toward Ella. "Mind if I sit?" He looked surprised. "Really? Unless you're married and your wife's in the back with a frying pan." "No wife," he said quickly. "It's just me and her." Rowan softened. "Then yeah, I'd like to sit." They talked for an hour about everything and nothing. About how he worked 2 jobs to keep Ella in a decent school, and how he used to be a contractor before the layoffs. About how Rowan grew up in foster care and built her first company at 23. He didn't ask how much she was worth, he didn't know, and she didn't offer. When Ella got tired, Ronan packed up her crayons and slipped her coat on gently like it was made of glass. "We should get home." Rowan stood too. "Of course," he hesitated. "You know, thanks for talking. It's been a while since I've had a real conversation with someone who wasn't 6, she smiled. "It was nice, you're nice," he laughed. "That's a first." "Ronan?" "Yeah, would you want to have dinner sometime, just us?" He blinked. "Wait, like a date, if you want to call it that." He looked completely stunned. "You're serious?" Completely. He paused, then grinned. "Okay, yeah, sounds pretty unbelievable, but yeah." Rowan didn't tell him she was a millionaire, not at that dinner, not the next one. Not even after she paid the bill at the steakhouse without blinking. He tried to argue about the check, fumbled for his wallet, started to say something about splitting it, and she just smiled and said, "Let me. You can get the next one." He didn't push. He didn't look at her like she was some rich woman slumming it for fun. He didn't try to impress her or act like someone he wasn't. He just held doors open, made her laugh, and looked at her like she wasn't intimidating at all. And Rowan, used to boardrooms and power plays and men who wanted her for her name, felt something unfamiliar start to grow in her chest. She didn't know how to say it yet. Didn't know if it was too soon. But when Ronan looked at her while walking her to her car that third night, his hand brushing hers, she wished desperately she could freeze the moment. He leaned in. "I want to kiss you." Rowan's breath caught. "Then kiss me." And he did. It wasn't flashy or perfect or practiced, but it was real. Honest. And Rowan felt her heart crack open in the best way when she got into her car. Her driver didn't say a word. But she saw the look in the rearview mirror. She was smiling like a woman in love, and maybe she was. The fourth time they saw each other, it wasn't planned. Ronan was dragging Ella through the rain, both of them soaked from a missed bus and a broken umbrella, when he spotted a familiar white coat darting out of a black SUV in front of a tall glass building. He didn't recognize the structure, but Rowan's silhouette was unmistakable even beneath the umbrella held over her by a man in a crisp suit. He had never seen her in that context before, surrounded by people who looked like they lived in private elevators and never checked the price tag on anything. She looked different there, sharper, like there was a whole other world built around her that he'd never been invited into. "Dad," Ella whispered, tugging his hand. "That's your girlfriend." He didn't correct her. Rowan turned just before the doors closed behind her. Her eyes locked on his, and for a second, the distance between them felt like a chasm. Then she smiled, not the kind she gave to the world, but the one he'd seen when they were sharing fries across a booth. She stepped back out from under the umbrella, heels clicking against the wet pavement, and crossed to him without hesitation. "You're soaked," she said, reaching for Ella first, tugging the little girl beneath her umbrella. "Where are you going like this?" "Home," Ronan said. "Bus broke down and the next one's not for 20 minutes. You're walking in this?" "I wasn't planning to, but life's not really into planning lately." Rowan glanced at the SUV still idling behind her. "Get in, both of you." Ronan hesitated, but Ella was already nodding. "Please, Dad." He looked down at her soggy hair and pink hoodie clinging to her arms, then back at Rowan, whose eyes didn't blink once. "All right," he said finally. "Just this once." Inside the car, warmth hit instantly. The driver handed Rowan a folded towel, which she passed to Ella. Ronan sat rigid, soaked jeans clinging to the leather seat. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We're not charity cases." Rowan turned to him, brows lowering. "Is that what this feels like?" He shifted. "I didn't mean it like that. This is not really our world." "Well, you're in it now. So you might as well stop acting like you've been caught trespassing." Ella giggled behind her towel, and Ronan's shoulders relaxed a little. The SUV pulled away from the curb, and Ronan gave the address quietly. Rowan didn't seem surprised by the neighborhood when they arrived, though most people would have been. The apartment complex was old, the kind with cracked stairs and rust blooming around the edges of the mailbox slots. But she didn't flinch. She just helped Ella with the seatbelt and walked both of them to the front door. Ronan unlocked it, then turned. "You want to come in?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Inside, the small apartment was clean but crowded. Toys lined the corners, a second-hand couch sagged in the middle, and the kitchen was barely a strip of counter and an old fridge humming too loud. Rowan took it all in without a word. "Can I show her my room?" Ella asked, bouncing on her toes. Ronan looked at Rowan, who nodded. "I'd love that." He watched them disappear down the hall, Rowan ducking beneath a string of paper stars taped to the ceiling. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure how the woman in $1,000 shoes could look so at ease in a two-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper. When she returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, she was holding a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. She said, "This is us," Rowan explained, holding it up, "and that I'm the one with the crown." Ronan laughed, taking it from her. "She's not wrong." Rowan leaned against the counter, watching him. "You're a good father," he looked down. "I try, my father left," she said, voice quieter now, Before I was born, my mother wasn't far behind. Ronan looked up, surprised. I don't say that for pity, she added quickly. Just to say I recognize what it takes to stay, even when it's hard. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "You want some tea? I've got two kinds, both cheap." Rowan smiled. "I'd love some." They sat at the tiny kitchen table, knees bumping under the uneven legs. He poured water into two mismatched mugs and passed one to her. "You seem different here," he said after a moment. She looked at him over the steam. "How so?" "Lighter, like you can breathe." Rowan tapped her thumb against the mug. "That's because I can." "When I'm with you, I'm not being measured," he frowned. "Measured?" She met his eyes. "You think being rich means you're free, but it's a trap too. People only see what they want to take or what they think you owe. You're the first person who didn't ask me for anything." Ronan set his mug down. "I don't want anything from you." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I came back." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It stretched between them like a warm blanket, layered with things they weren't quite ready to say. But something had shifted. She wasn't a stranger in heels anymore, and he wasn't just the guy behind the counter. When Rowan finally stood to leave, Ella came running from her room. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, arms wrapping around Rowan's waist. Rowan crouched. "If it's all right with your dad." Ella looked up at Ronan, eyes wide. He pretended to think. "I guess we could allow it." Rowan kissed the girl's head. "Then I'll see you both soon." The door closed behind her, and Ronan stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet. He didn't know what this was becoming, but he knew it mattered. And for the first time in a long time, something in his life felt like possibility instead of survival. The next morning, when Rowan returned, she wasn't alone. She brought a canvas bag filled with books, a box of paints, and a stack of sketch pads for Ella. She didn't ask if it was okay, just set them gently on the kitchen table and said, "I thought she might like these." Ronan opened the first book. It was hardcover, heavy, the kind that would have cost more than a full shift's wage. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." Ella bounced on her toes, already pulling out colors. "Can I start now?" "Of course," Rowan said, smiling. Ronan waited until Ella was distracted, then leaned close. "Tell me the truth, why are you doing all this?" Rowan's expression softened. "Because I care." "But why me?" She looked at him carefully. "Because you didn't see me as an opportunity. You saw me as a person." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he just looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life by accident and was now changing everything. And for the first time, he let himself wonder what it might look like if she never left. Ronan leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching Rowan help Ella tie a piece of yarn around a cardboard crown they'd made. The apartment smelled faintly of glue and powdered cheese from the boxed macaroni Ella had insisted on for lunch. In the living room, colored pencils rolled off the edge of the coffee table, littering the floor in a way that normally would have made him anxious. Today, he didn't care. "All right, Princess Hale," Rowan said, adjusting the crown on Ella's curls. "I now pronounce you Queen of the Coloring Kingdom." Ella beamed. "Does that mean I get to eat dessert before dinner?" "Only if your royal advisor says yes." They both turned to look at Ronan. He raised an eyebrow. "She still has to finish her actual dinner first." "Royal decree." Rowan gave a mock sigh. "Dictatorship. Tragic." Ella giggled and ran off toward her room, the crown slipping down one side of her head. Rowan stood and stretched her arms above her head, her blouse pulling slightly at the seams. Ronan cleared his throat and reached for two glasses from the cupboard, filling them both with water. "You're good with her," he said, handing her one. Rowan took it. "Kids don't intimidate me. You don't seem like someone who's been around a lot of them." "I haven't. But I remember being one." He nodded, watching her as she leaned against the opposite counter. "You never talk about them, your family." "There's not much to say. I bounced around a lot. Homes, cities. I learned early not to expect people to stay." He didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Why haven't you told me what you do?" Rowan's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. "Because I like how you look at me now." "And how is that, like I'm enough?" Ronan didn't respond immediately. He wanted to tell her she was more than enough. But he didn't know if he was allowed to say that yet, not when he still couldn't wrap his head around what this was becoming. "I won't stop looking at you that way," he said finally. "I want to believe you." He stepped closer. "Then believe me." Before she could answer, Ella called from the hallway. "Dad, my crown broke," Ronan sighed. "Rescue mission. Be right back." Rowan watched him disappear down the hallway, her heart twisting in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't planned on this, a man with calloused palms and a crooked smile, a daughter with wide eyes and paint-streaked cheeks. She hadn't planned on wanting them this badly. She checked her phone. A dozen missed calls from her assistant. 2 from the head of a venture fund she was supposed to meet that evening. She silenced the screen and slid it back into her purse. When Ronan returned, Ella trailing behind him with a taped-up crown and a satisfied grin, Rowan turned to him. "I have to go to a gala tomorrow night," she said. "It's for a foundation I'm on the board of. They're honoring a few entrepreneurs. One of them's a friend." He wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Sounds important." "It's not," she said, "but I'd like you to come." He paused. "To a gala?" "Yes," he blinked. "Rowan, I don't own anything you could call formal. Then we'll get you something. I can't afford a tux." "I didn't say you had to buy it," he hesitated. "I don't want to feel like a project." "You're not," she said. "You're the person I want by my side." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll come." The next afternoon, Rowan sent a car to pick him up. Ella was with her neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who adored babysitting for short stints and always made chocolate chip cookies that somehow rivaled anything from a bakery. Ronan stepped into the boutique Rowan had texted him the address for, expecting a dusty rental shop. Instead, he found himself in a space lined with glass shelves, dark wood, and men in tailored suits who greeted him like he'd walked in wearing a crown. Rowan was already there, waiting with a garment bag draped over her arm. "You're early," she said, her eyes scanning the jeans and flannel he still wore. "You said 6. It's 5:45. She handed him the bag. "Try this on." He raised an eyebrow. "You picked it out already. I guessed your size." He stepped into the changing room and emerged a few minutes later in a black tuxedo that fit him better than anything he'd ever worn. The fabric was smooth and heavier than he was used to, and the cut made him look like someone he didn't entirely recognize. Rowan's eyes widened slightly. "You clean up well," he laughed, tugging at the lapel. "I feel like a fraud. You look like a man who belongs anywhere." They drove to the gala in a sleek black car with tinted windows and leather seats that smelled faintly of cedar. Ronan sat stiffly at first, trying not to touch anything, but Rowan reached for his hand and held it the whole way. The event was held in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the city skyline. Inside, chandeliers sparkled like dripping stars, and people moved like they were gliding. Every table was covered in ivory linen, and a string quartet played softly from a raised platform. Rowan introduced him to people with names he couldn't pronounce. She never once stumbled over calling him her date. At one point, she stepped away to speak to a board member, leaving him at a table with a man who wore a watch worth more than Ronan's annual income. "So," the man said, sipping from a crystal tumbler. "What do you do?" Ronan glanced across the room where Rowan was laughing with 2 women in floor-length gowns. "I build things," he said. The man raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Cabinets, closets, houses when I get lucky." "Right now I manage a coffee shop part-time." The man gave a tight smile. "Interesting." Ronan didn't flinch. "It is." Rowan returned moments later, her eyes scanning his face. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," Ronan said, standing. "You look incredible, by the way." She touched her necklace absently. "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of toasts and applause. When they finally escaped onto the rooftop terrace, the city lights glittered below them like fallen stars. Rowan leaned against the railing. "You did well tonight. I didn't spill anything, trip over the carpet, or insult anyone, so yeah, I'd say that's a win," she laughed, turning to face him. "You made me proud." "Why does that sound like more than just gala talk?" "Because it is." He stepped closer. "Rowan, I've been trying to figure out what this is." "I have too." "I think I'm falling in love with you," her breath hitched. "You think?" He took her hand. "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "So am I." He kissed her under the stars, the city humming below them, and for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't surviving his life, he was living it. Later, as the car rolled through the quiet streets back toward his apartment, Rowan rested her head on his shoulder. What happens next? He asked. She looked up at him. Whatever we want. Ronan could feel the shift before she even said it. It was in the way Rowan stood in his kitchen, her fingers curled around the edge of the counter, her gaze flicking toward Ella's room as if memorizing every detail. She wasn't distant, she never was with him, but she was preoccupied, her mind tugged in a direction she hadn't yet named. He set a plate of toast on the table, watching her carefully. You heading to the office today? She nodded slowly. There's something I need to finalize. It won't take long. Her voice was steady, but the pause that followed was not. And, he asked. She looked up at him then, her dark eyes unreadable. There's going to be a feature on me, one of those glossy magazine profiles. It was scheduled before I met you, but the photo shoot's today. They want to shoot in my penthouse. He leaned back slightly. That's big. It's ridiculous, she said quickly, waving a hand. It's all curated nonsense, but it's part of the game. I just didn't want you to find out, that way. He studied her. Find out what? She hesitated. How much I have, what I own, the scale of it. I already know you're successful. That's not the same, she murmured. He didn't push. Instead, he reached for her hand. Then show me, she blinked. What? Take me to the shoot. Let me see it, all of it. I don't want to be protected from your world. Rowan's shoulders dropped slightly. You're sure? He nodded. I want to know you, not the edited version. Later that morning, they drove through the city in her car, just the two of them, while Ella stayed with Mrs. Callahan, who had become Ella's favorite person after Rowan. Ronan sat beside Rowan as the skyline sharpened and the streets narrowed into gold-trimmed sidewalks and polished stone buildings. When they pulled into the underground garage of a towering glass high-rise, he tried not to stare. The elevator opened directly into her penthouse. He stepped out slowly, taking it in. The floor was polished marble, the walls lined with art he didn't recognize but instinctively knew was worth more than a year of his life. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire stretch of the city, bathed in sunlight. The furniture was modern, sculptural, almost too perfect to sit in. Rowan watched him take it in silently. This is where you live, she nodded. Sometimes I don't really sleep here much. He turned to her. Why not? I don't know. She looked around. It doesn't feel like home. He stepped closer. Then what does? She met his eyes. Your apartment. Before he could respond, a makeup artist swept into the room, followed by a stylist and a photographer carrying a clipboard. Rowan stepped away to greet them, seamlessly slipping into the other version of herself, polished, executive, composed. Ronan leaned against the edge of a sleek console table, watching her pose in front of the skyline, the camera clicking rapidly. She wore a navy silk blouse, structured trousers, and heels that made her nearly eye level with the tallest man in the room. But the woman smiling for the camera wasn't the one who helped Ella glue pipe cleaners onto cereal boxes. She was steel beautiful, unshakable. The photographer called for a break, and Rowan crossed the room, tugging the heels off as she approached him. You okay? She asked, breathless. I don't know how you do it, he said. It's like watching someone step into a second skin. She lowered herself onto the couch beside him. It's not a second skin, it's just armor. Does anyone besides me see you without it? No, she said softly. Not until now. He looked around again. It's beautiful, but it's lonely, she nodded. I've spent most of my life building things no one could take from me. But I never built anything I actually wanted to keep. You have now. Her breath hitched slightly. Do I? He nodded. You have us. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. That evening, back at his apartment, Rowan helped Ella with her bedtime story, their ritual now. When she closed the book, Ella climbed into bed, curling beneath her blanket. Can Rowan stay over tonight? She asked, eyes already drooping. Rowan looked at Ronan. He smiled. If she wants to. I want to, she whispered, brushing Ella's hair back gently. When they stepped out of the bedroom, Rowan exhaled. She's easy to love. So are you, Ronan said. She turned to him. There's something else. The magazine, it's releasing the feature online tomorrow morning. I don't know how people will react. Your name's not in it, but there's a risk. You and Ella, people might start looking. You're worried I'll run. I'm worried I'll lose you. He stepped closer. You won't. That night they lay in his bed while the city moved quietly outside the window. It wasn't spacious. The mattress dipped slightly on one side. But Rowan had never felt more at peace. The next morning, the article went live. By noon, her phone was buzzing nonstop calls from business partners, PR reps, and acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. The article painted her as a visionary, a powerhouse, a woman who had built an empire. There were photos of her standing by the window of her penthouse, one hand on her hip, a Mona Lisa smile on her lips, but the comments were what got to her: speculation. Gossip. A few mocking the crown Ella had given her that had ended up in the background of one shot. She hadn't noticed it until Ronan pointed it out. "It's the best part of the photo," he said, that afternoon as she sat in his apartment again, Ella building castles from soup cans. Rowan turned to Ronan. "Let's get out of here," he blinked. "Where?" "Anywhere," he studied her. "You hate running." "I'm not running, I'm choosing." Later that week, they took Ella out of school for a day and flew to a small seaside town Rowan had once visited for a retreat. The house she rented was modest, sunlit, and perched on a hill above the water. It had only 2 bedrooms and a crooked porch swing, but Ella loved it instantly. They spent the days walking along the shore, cooking together, and talking until the stars blinked awake. Rowan didn't check her email once. Ronan built a bonfire the second night and they roasted marshmallows until Ella fell asleep in Rowan's lap. "I've never felt like this," Rowan whispered, brushing a thumb across Ella's cheek. "Like what?" "Like I have everything, and I don't have to fight to keep it." "You don't," he said. "Not anymore." They returned to the city changed. Rowan resigned from 2 boards, sold the penthouse, moved into a brownstone closer to Ella's school. She didn't announce any of it, just did it, quietly. Deliberately, Ronan helped paint Ella's new room lavender. They planted herbs in the window boxes and hung paper stars from the ceiling again. This time, Rowan held the ladder while Ronan stapled them up. 3 weeks later, he proposed. It wasn't over dinner or at a gala. It was on a Tuesday morning, while they were packing Ella's lunch and pouring cereal. He turned to her, held out a ring that had once belonged to his mother, and asked if she'd marry him. She said yes before he could even finish the sentence. They married in a garden behind the brownstone. Ella wore a flower crown. Rowan wore a dress with pockets, and Ronan wore the same tuxedo from the gala. There were no photographers, no press, just neighbors, friends, and the only family they needed. That night, after Ella was asleep and the last of the candles had burned down, Rowan leaned into Ronan's chest and said, "You know what the headline should have been?" He kissed her temple. "What?" "A poor dad cleaned a woman's spilled drink at a cafe, and she fell in love," he laughed. "Catchy?" She smiled up at him, eyes shining. "True." And it was, every word. The first time Rowan sat in the small park near Ella's school, she found herself watching the other mothers with an unexpected sense of peace. No one glanced twice at her tailored coat or the discreet diamond band on her finger. She was just another parent waiting for the bell to ring. And that, somehow, meant more than any boardroom ever had. Ronan arrived 5 minutes later, holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street. "They had those lemon scones you like," he said, sitting beside her on the curved iron bench. "The ones with the sugar crust." "You're spoiling me," she teased, unwrapping the pastry. "Figured I'd try since you're stuck with me." She nudged him gently with her shoulder. "Don't ever say that." "I married you on purpose." "Bold move," he said. "Considering I still have to Google how to fix a leaky faucet, you build furniture from scratch, which is exactly why I ended up flooding the kitchen last week." She laughed, brushing crumbs from her lap. "You did not. You barely got the floor wet." Ella said it looked like a river. "She's dramatic. She gets it from you." They both turned at the sound of the bell, and within moments the playground gate burst open. Children flooded out, backpacks bouncing, voices rising. Ella spotted them immediately and sprinted across the grass, her curls bouncing beneath her purple headband. Rowan crouched as Ella threw herself into her arms. "Did you see the volcano?" Ella asked, breathless. "It actually erupted, Mr. Callahan said it wasn't supposed to go that high, but I think I added too much baking soda." "You're a scientist in the making," Ronan said, ruffling her hair. "I'm a volcanologist," she corrected with a proud grin. "That's a real thing." Rowan took her hand as they walked back toward the car. "Then that makes me the mother of a volcanologist. Should I start preparing for explosions at home?" "I already made a list of what we need for the next one." They spent the evening helping Ella build a model of the solar system out of foam balls and wire hangers. Rowan painted Saturn's rings while Ronan tried to keep Jupiter from rolling off the table. By the time the planets were finished, Ella had fallen asleep on the couch, her fingers still smudged with blue paint. Ronan lifted her gently and carried her to bed. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching as he tucked the blanket around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "She's lucky," she whispered. "She's ours," he said. "That's luck enough." Downstairs, Rowan poured 2 glasses of wine and curled up beside him on the couch. "I got an offer today," she said after a moment, "to speak at a tech summit in Singapore." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "That's big." "It is, and I said no." He set down his glass. "Are you sure you want to do that? I've spent years saying yes to everything that kept me moving forward." "But I don't need forward anymore. I just want here." He reached for her hand. "I don't ever want you to feel like you gave up something for us." "I didn't," she said. "I just traded it for something better." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence until the clock struck midnight. The next morning, Rowan opened the door to find her assistant, Delia, standing there with a clipboard and a guilty expression. "I know you said no more pop-ins," Delia said quickly, "but this came to the office and I figured you should see it." Rowan took the envelope. Heavy, embossed, she frowned and opened it. "You've been nominated," Delia said. "Entrepreneur of the Year." Global category. Rowan stared at the letter. "I didn't even know they were accepting nominations." "You weren't." "Someone submitted you privately." Delia hesitated, then added, "It was anonymous." Rowan looked over to Ronan, who had just stepped into the hallway with a mug of coffee in one hand and Ella's backpack slung over his shoulder. She narrowed her eyes at him. "Did you have anything to do with this?" He blinked. "Me, I don't even know how to nominate someone. I barely understand Instagram." Ella peeked around the corner. "What's an entrepreneur?" Rowan smiled. "Someone who builds things." "Like Dad," Ronan laughed. "Not exactly." "Your mom builds companies." Ella considered that. "Can I build one too?" Rowan crouched to her level. "You can build anything you want." That night, Rowan sat at the kitchen table while Ronan helped Ella brush her teeth upstairs. She stared at the nomination letter, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the bills and grocery lists. The awards ceremony was months away. Maybe she'd go. Maybe not. She didn't need the validation anymore. 2 weeks later, they hosted a neighborhood dinner in the Brownstones' backyard. String lights hung from the fence, and Ronan grilled while Rowan passed out lemonade in mason jars. Ella ran barefoot across the grass, dragging her friend Maya by the hand as they shouted about a secret garden they were building behind the shed. Rowan watched her husband laugh with the neighbors, flipping burgers with one hand and waving off compliments with the other. "You're glowing, Mrs. Callahan said, settling beside her with a paper plate full of potato salad. Rowan glanced at Ronan. "I'm happy, that's all." "I've seen a lot of people chase happiness," Mrs. Callahan said. "Most of them run right past it, but you stopped. That's the difference." Rowan sipped her drink. "I didn't stop. I just turned around and realized it was already behind me." Later that night, when the guests had left and the dishes were done, Ronan pulled her into the living room and handed her a small wooden box. "I've been working on this," he said. "For a while." She opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate frame, hand-carved, with a photo of the 3 of them standing in the backyard, arms around each other, mid-laugh. On the back, he'd etched the words, "Home is where you are." Her throat tightened. "Ronan, I couldn't afford diamonds," he said. "But I can give you this." She kissed him before he could say another word. They moved through life like a song after that, unhurried, full of rhythm and perfectly in tune. Rowan continued consulting, but rarely traveled. Ronan expanded his woodworking into a small online store, and orders began pouring in from people who found joy in the care he put into every piece. Ella started dance lessons, and insisted on showing them every move, even the ones that required falling dramatically to the floor. They celebrated their first anniversary with a picnic in the same park where they'd once waited for Ella outside her school. Rowan wore a sundress. Ronan packed sandwiches and lemonade. Ella made them wear paper crowns. At one point, Rowan leaned her head on Ronan's chest and whispered, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spilled that coffee? He smiled, brushing her hair back. I'd still be making cappuccinos, you'd still be conquering the world, but we wouldn't have this. No, he said. We wouldn't. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, she said. I love you more. No, she whispered. Not possible. He kissed her temple. We'll argue about it for the rest of our lives, and they did for 37 years. They lived in the brownstone until Ella went to college, then moved to a cottage by the ocean. Ronan built her a greenhouse. Rowan filled it with lavender and lemon balm. They still danced in the kitchen and laughed until they couldn't breathe. Ella became a volcanologist, for real. She married a quiet, kind man and brought them twin grandsons who adored building birdhouses with Ronan and baking cookies with Rowan. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Ronan gave Rowan a new photo frame. Inside it was the same picture laughing in the backyard, but behind it, a second one. A recent photo of them holding hands on the porch, hair silver, eyes just as bright. Still my crown-wearing girl, he whispered. Rowan kissed him. Still my favorite accident. And in the quiet of that evening, surrounded by children and laughter and the scent of rosemary from the garden, they held each other close. Their story had started with a spilled coffee, but it ended exactly where it belonged, with love. Always.